Right. So if you can't hear me, let me know. I have a dog at home. I give these presentations to my dog, and she watches TV. And I know when I'm not doing so good when I don't have her attention. So I'll make sure that I at least get that kind of attention from you guys. How does that sound? A little bit of my background, just so you know where I'm coming from. We're going to talk about whether or not we're in a cyber war. How many people here in info security? They're actually dedicated to info security. How many of you guys think we're in a cyber war? About half of you guys. Okay, good. I'm going to throw this out at you, and we'll just talk about it. Who cares, first of all? Does anybody care whether or not we're in the middle of a cyber? All right, good. You guys are security professionals. I like that. When I ask regular IT guys, they could give a crap, right? Yeah. And so you should care, because there's a very significant difference between whether or not this is burglaries or warfare, right? And that's really the point of today's conversation, is for you guys to think about this and how it relates to whether or not how you do your job. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. All right, I'm from New York. I grew up on Long Island. I give speeches all around the country. I love to come back to New York because you guys can track with me, right? You could actually follow me. And also, I really appreciate you coming out tonight. I'm going to get right into this because it's 45 minutes. I have a lot of content, but I know how hard it is to get New Yorkers to sit in seats. I'll give you a little story on that. I went to school out of New York, and I would have to fly back when I came back for holidays, you know, on Thanksgiving and so forth. And one holiday on Thanksgiving, I came back flying, and I was delayed out of New York, out of JFK. And they threw us to Newark. We landed in Newark. Newark being a New York airport, right? So my mother was supposed to pick me up. I'm a college kid. And I landed, and I called her on up, and I said, she was at JFK, and I said, Mom, I'm at Newark. Can you come pick me up? And she said, and I know you guys can relate to this, she goes, Newark, New Jersey? I said, yeah, Newark, New Jersey. It's in Metro New York Airport, you know, Newark, New Jersey. That's where they land. She's like, well, how are you going to get home? I said, I was hoping you'd come pick me up. She's like, that's another state. That's New Jersey. You'll have to figure out how to get home, you know? So like all New Yorkers, I eventually made my way through the Port Authority, 42nd Street Bus Port Authority, which back then was far worse than it is today, and it's no picnic today, right? Long Island Railroad. All right, cyber war. A little bit of my background, and we're going to go through cyber war. And I do this only so you understand where I'm coming from. 8 years U.S. military, 6 years B-52 electronic warfare officer. I was in pretty much every country in conflict from the 90s, right? And I spent the last 2 years in the Pentagon doing computer warfare. And then I went off, because it's a follow-on, right, to be CISO at Campbell Soup Company. Don't ask me how that works, right? Where I did everything from soup to nuts. I was there for 3 years, then spent 6 years at Campbell Soup Company, at SunGard. I ran SunGard's global security business. I actually started that business before I went over and ran my own business, professional managed services, which was purchased by a cloud company 3 years later, called Evolve IP. I was there for 2 years running their SEM cloud product through the cloud, and then came on over to Radware. They recruited me on over 3.5 years ago to run their the America's business in security. I tell you that just because I have a little bit of a buying background, a little bit of an idealistic background, and a lot of a business background, right? so you know where I'm coming from. Cyber warfare. So I've been in the profession of arms, and I've studied the professional arms, and one of them is Sun Tzu, right? You have to study Sun Tzu, and you can't get around studying Sun Tzu. Why? Because most of us know a lot of Sun Tzu, but we don't even know it's attributable to Sun Tzu, right? Know your friends, hold them close, know your enemies, and hold them closer. It's Sun Tzu. He's unbelievable prolific with the quotes. But the point of Sun Tzu was all about what is war, and then how do you conduct warfare, right? And his idea was, if you understand what warfare is, you can both A, avoid it, or B, be very good at it, or win it, right? So there's been a lot of debate. You know, we talk about Bruce Shire, a person of which I really love. He's completely against the idea that we're in warfare, for example, right? He's one of the, and I love him, and I think I love more than half what he says, 75% what he says. But he's not into that we're in cyber warfare. There's another camp out there that believes we're in the 4th generation warfare. I used to be in the camp of who cares, right? But I can tell you that if you look at this differently, and you look at what this means to your day job, it's very meaningful if you're in info security. So I'm going to make some correlations between Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu had 13 tactics. You know, Sun Tzu is actually like the Bible in that there's 4 different interpretations coming off of Chinese, and they have different kinds of ways of actually interpreting what he said and what he didn't say, right? And there's actually a lot of things that are attributable to him that actually wasn't him. But there's 13 tenets. I of course, did what you would do for a presentation. I took the 4 most cherry-picked tenets that most relate to us, and I'm going to provide them for you tonight, right? And the ones that didn't relate or weren't really worthy, I just kind of ignored, right? Actually, the truth is there's a lot of reality to everything he says. And one of the things that he says in what we're dealing with today, he says war is won by deception. It's not won by might, it's not won by speed, it's not won by politics, it's won by deception at the end of the day. You deceive the other enemy's ability to actually believe that they can fight you. That's his philosophy, right? He also believes that you are going to be attacked when somebody believes that you are worthy to be attacked, and you can be attacked, right? And he believes warfare is when somebody is dedicated to attacking you, not serendipitously, but purposefully. And one of the ways that you view warfare is that somebody continues to attack you, and they vary the tactics to make sure that they're effective, right? So this one tenet is this idea of varying tactics. So I'm just going to go through a couple of items of whether or not what we've been experiencing out in the marketplace is akin to warfare, right? The idea of varied tactics. So at Radware, and I said I'm not going to make this a pitch, but I want to go through this for a second. At Radware, we've been tracking for the last 3 years this idea of attack complexity. And attack complexity has 3 dimensions to it. The first dimension is very security focused. It's this idea of an attack vector's complexity, the idea that you get attacked, and the way that you get attacked, how complex is that attack, how egregiously effective is that attack. That's something we're all used to. You know, we study things like SQL injections and different techniques, different ways of getting in. I think that's pretty much what we've come to know and love as security. The second vector is this idea, or the second complexity is this idea of multiple attack vectors, right? So you have the single complexity on the attack, but if you add attacks, regardless of complexity, you gain effectiveness in your attack, right? Now think about this for a second. Many of you sit down and you do a lot of reviews. You do scanning reviews, you do maybe penetration testing reviews. Have you ever tried to test 7, 8, 10, 12 vectors coming at you at the same time and see how your tools handle all of those things at the same time? This is what's called a cyber attack, right? And the test is almost immeasurable, right? Because it doesn't make a difference even if you're doing that testing today, because the amount of variables on that almost leads to the point where you can't even test it, right? Here's a SQL injection, here's a volume attack, here's a UDP SIP attack, here's a brute force attack, here's an intrusion attempt, here's a low and slow connection-oriented attack, and I'm going to throw it all at you. And you can vary it, right? Technology and so forth. So that's the second level of the dimension of complexity. The third level is this idea of which I don't believe we test at all in security. And it's this idea, I'm just doing that to bother you, David, you know. And so I'm going to move around a lot. And the third dimension is time. How many of you have factored time into whether or not your security defenses are effective? It's another dimension, right? I'm going to say it again. How many of you have factored time into whether or not your security defenses are effective? Do you know what I mean by that? You factored that in. How do you factor it in? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it a year? Do you test for a long period of time?
Seconds, minutes, hours.
Suppose it goes on for Suppose you do a good job. You're blocking an attack, and the attack pervades. Will it always be blocked?
I've seen that too, where it's just an equal force, and you're wondering, wow, I'm putting so much resource into just holding it back.
As a function of time, we now know, as a function of time, that eventually even the same attack that's blocked will become effective as a function of time, right? The bad guys know this, and I'll show you how it works from an effectiveness perspective. Here are some major attacks. All of these are customers of Radware, right, that have given us the permission to talk. In 2010, WikiLeaks, the duration of the attacks was 3 days, right? The amount of vectors was 4. So this was things like, this is a specific kind of, if you will, munition that's being hurled at you. This is a specific kind of attack technique. A SQL injection, a brute force, a CSRF attack, a volume SYN attack, a garbage UDP flood, a connection-oriented attack, a SIP attack, right? These are all attacks. These are vectors. 3 days, 4 attacks took down almost all of the payment system cards in America, right? During that period of time, 2010. Today, when you get an attack, on average, it's 7 attack vectors, right? We've seen it up to 27 attack vectors at one time. 20 separate kinds of munitions being thrown at you, right? I'm going to talk about that for a moment. But if you've got 27 different kinds of attacks thrown at you, even if your tools are good at each one of those independently, do you think that they can handle all of them at the same time, right? How many of you asked a question from, like, let's say an IPS vendor, how many attacks can this IPS handle at one time? Ask that question. I didn't when I was purchasing these things. I never even thought about it, right? These are new things. I'm going to talk about what's going on in security. These are new ways at which you can overcome a security system, right? All right, so that's a pretty varied tactic. Let's talk about bots for a moment. When we think about bots, what readily comes to mind? Was it?
Servers.
Starburst?
No, servers.
Servers, server-based bots. Yeah, right. That was what we traditionally grew up thinking about, was server-based bots, right? Trinity, TFN. Now we know that bots have grown up. There's now things like, obviously, not just server-based bots, but there's consumer-based bots, handheld bots, right? There's not just handheld bots, but there's cloud-based bots. We know that there's bots spooling all over on cloud-based platforms. We'll talk about why that's so advantageous. We also know there's voluntary bots, right? LOI, COIC, people that actually participate in calls for action. They download their own tools and they actually participate in just a coordinated command and control infrastructure that's not technical, right? These are voluntary bots. Bots are the future armies. Bots are the armies of today. The way in which people take you down today, and they actually amass anger against you, is to take malware, amplify it, use IT against you, and take you down, right? I'm going to show you how bots in the future are going to grow up. This is Mickey Mouse. All of this is just absolutely Mickey Mouse. Why? Because it's very distinguishable. We can see easily legitimate from illegitimate traffic today, if you know what you're doing. I'm going to show you some tools here in not too distant future that you will make it almost impossible for you to be able to discern a bot that's illegitimate from legitimate traffic. And that's where we're headed as a community to go figure out. The age of automation is upon us on an attack perspective, and our future duty is to actually generate automation that will be better than the automation that's hitting us, right? That's what we're after. Yeah, I know, my wife and my dog also look at me sometimes, you know, like. All right. So this isn't the world of script kiddies anymore. This isn't the world of people that know how to do bots or know how to do Ajax or know how to do really great SOAP calls, right? We know it's a weapon, and Sun Tzu tells us it's a weapon, when we can have a technique and it can be sold. When we can have a mercenary and they're for hire. When we don't need to know the tactics or the tools or the techniques, but they're for hire. Does there anybody not believe that you can actually purchase weapons today on the internet? A 10,000 botted army in Korea today is $9.99 for a month. $9.99, right? This is another client of Radware, happened to be out of Russia. I'm going to read this to you because I want you to think about this. I want you to think about this really from what you would do. We read a lot of things, but I want you to really think about what would you do if you got this. So here's the email. It's sent to them. I just kind of gave you some excerpts. It says, this is to inform you that the website wildberries.ru, Wildberries is a customer of ours, is scheduled for elimination. How about that? Via the use of DDoS attacks. However, after due consideration, the team, I guess their team, has decided to give you a choice. They say, we offer you an alternative solution than annihilation. And by the way, this is a retailer. You can join our private club. The one-time membership is $10,000. It's payable to this account, and Bitcoins are preferable. And you have to be made by this date. If you don't do that, the first attack will involve over 25,000 node, delivering between 45 and 100 gigs of traffic. And it's sure to be considered heavy. Typically, to go remedy a situation like this from a private company, such as Radware, right, it's going to cost you $20,000. So the choice is yours, right? Now you ask yourself, what would you do? What can you do here?
That's what this guy does.
The way you're presenting this here is, if the mafia comes to me and says, you know, I'm going to take all your money, I'm going to kill you, or you can go to the police and see who's going to protect you better. I mean, you're making it sound like it's not an obvious choice. I mean, if the bad guys can...
So let's talk...
Why should I... Maybe...
So the police...
Call a good guy.
So that's the question. Can you go to the police and could they handle this?
Probably not.
Not unless you're really a big important company.
Will the FBI handle you if you to show them something like this? You guys...
If you're Bank of America.
If you're Bank of America, how about you guys? I'm talking about.
No.
If you're wildberries.ru.
But this brings the question, you know, you said we're in a cyber war. This is organized crime.
Well, let's talk about it, right? So let's talk about that for a second. Was Cold War a warfare? It's recognized today as warfare, right?
Sure.
Just because this isn't nation-state oriented, and maybe not even ideological. By the way, a lot of warfare is not necessarily over geopolitics, right? It could be raw assets, natural assets. It could be economic assets. Right? Was it drug warfare? I don't know. Is this warfare? There's a proposition that organized crime feels like transnational geopolitical institutions that have operations that feel very much like a nation state, right? You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Intellectual property loss, it's warfare.
Right.
And when you factor
There's, if you go,
of our economic
do a WikiLeaks. I was kind of a skeptic a little bit myself, but you have to stretch your head a little bit. You know, in 1952, would you have called it a Cold War? In 1962, it got more clear. In 1972, it was crystal clear, right? You see what I'm saying? Yep.
I'm not disputing there's
Yeah.
a cyber war going on. That's the example, isn't it? Cyber.
Well, you know, let's think about it differently. Let's suppose the same people behind that are the same ones behind cryptolocker, right? Let's suppose the same people behind that are the same ones that are behind cyber hostage situations, right? And if they're pursuing a maybe political order, you know, does it reveal itself? I don't know, and I'm just throwing it out there saying is that the more that people gain power, and the more that these tools are effective, the more that they'll be used. And are you able to defend yourself against something that's not a burglary, but organized? I mean, seriously funded and organized, right? And now you look at yourself as a security profession, you go, why would somebody do this? And that's where a lot of us are, right? We're into risk-adjusted protection sets. And we're using historical data points as opposed to the conjecture of future directional data points, right? So let's go on the second point here, Army on the March. I'm going to give you 4 stories, because I think storytelling is something we miss in principle. I'm going to give you 4 stories, and I'm going to go across the map. I'm going to go very fast on this because I'm a little behind. And I just want to leave them with you. I think these 4 stories each tell a point. Anybody familiar with the Colombian hackers by chance? What I see, and we're an international company, Radware, we do a lot of international work. And by the way, we participated in some of this in terms of protection. The reason I bring up the Colombian hackers was in July of this year was there was a hacking event during their Independence Day, the Colombian Independence Day. And what had happened was a group called the Colombian hackers decided that they wanted to silence the government. It was an ideological based attack. And they felt the government was silencing them, so they would silence the government. And when they did the attack, they threw these major techniques at them. Web applications and then volume-based, network-based attacks. But the attacks that were really powerful were the web application attacks. They took down, they had a single day, they told them in one single day, for 24 hours they were going to attack them. They took down 26 to 30 government websites, including the National Police.
Would you like me to turn on down the lights?
Yeah, that would be great, actually. I know you're going to have to trial it a little bit, right? There we go. How's that better? Yeah. By the way, this happens to be the sales guy for Colombia and Radware. And the attacks, what made this notable, and the reason I'm bringing it up, isn't the fact that it was an intra-country attack, is that what we, I think, fail to realize a lot of times as security professionals is the intelligence value of some of the attack types that are being leveraged around the world, and how they actually, as they become more effective, or there's an efficacy in approach, they actually hit our shores, they hit our companies, right? And in this situation, there was a brute force attack that was pretty powerful. In this case, it's showing PC Anywhere, but they actually did brute force attack against many of the environments. They took down the National Police. They took down the President's office. They took down the National IRS, or their equivalent. They took down essentially all of the major functions, right, of the government. They took down the national broadcasting system. The brute force attack was very, very interesting because as a security professional, how do you protect against brute force attacks? What's the standard answer to a brute force attack?
Drop connections, lock the IP address.
And lockout, right, after so many unsuccessful attempts, right? Suppose lockout is the desire.
Well, that is the desire in a lot of brute force attacks.
For especially people that are trying to take you down, right?
They have a service of that.
Okay, right. All right, so you're locking people out. Now, they happen to actually attack the voice system at the same time, so while people were trying to reset their passwords, they couldn't get into that anyway. Again, a nuisance, right? Well, I ask you this. On a brute force attack, when it's successful, i.e., there's a successful user ID and password that connects during that period of time, how do you get alerted for that? So you had a successful attempt, so they actually logged in. How do you know that that login was unauthentic versus authentic?
Origin IP.
Yeah, if you're tracking GeoIP, it could be credible. That could be a credible way. I agree with that. How many people are tracking that, right? Especially for users.
And like heuristics, I mean, if someone logged into that account yesterday
from Russia or something like that.
Russia,
Right.
And then 10 minutes later they log in again overtime.
Right, but I'd be arguing that probably all the attacks were coming intra-country anyway, right?
You have to go to
The same.
But our DPI stuff is.
Yeah. It's a very difficult problem for a security professional, I can tell you this right off the bat. Do IPSs protect against brute force attacks? No. Do firewalls? No. Right? Does data loss protection? No. This is a very peculiar attack. And by the way, after you go through a brute force DDoS attack, in my opinion, you have a lot of work to do afterwards, right? Because every single successful login attempt could possibly have been an unsuccessful login attempt, or I should say a nefarious login, right? It's a very difficult situation. I apologize for this. I guess my sales guy in Colombia is really trying to get a hold of me. I guess he knows I'm giving a presentation about his Colombian client. Operation Ababil, second story. You guys familiar with Operation Ababil? How about U.S. bank attacks?
Yes.
Yeah. Operation Ababil is a name that Iranian attackers gave the operation, when they announced the operation, Operation Ababil, right? Operation Ababil started when? You know how long we've been in this? Does it say in here? No. No? Good, it doesn't say in here. Started September 18th, 2012. 2012. It had 4 major phases. Each phase had at least 3 waves, right? You talk about an army on the move. Every phase was defined by different attack types. Every wave was a variation in the attack types themselves. Every new phase started the phase with all the tools that were effective from the previous phase and then some new things, right? Does that sound like warfare?
Yes.
All right. Let me show you something else. If you overlay the Iranian 3 cyber armies that are supposed to be in operation today, Paris 2, the Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam cyber fighters, and the Iranian cyber army, on a timeline, and you look at all the times that they've been significantly active, what you see is that at no one time were 2 cyber armies active at the same time. Sun Tzu says, you fight with deception, you don't fight with reality, right? So the question is here, they either have a very large mainframe that they timeshare on, that they do all their attacks, or there's not 3 armies, right? I think that's a pretty good postulation. All right, so one story was intra-country. Second, using web application attacks that are typically considered DPI and data confidentiality, not cyber attacks and DDoS. Second story was a nation state fighting an industry segment of commercial enterprise in a country. Third story, Spam House. Who knows Spam House attack? Good, good. If you haven't heard of Spam House attack, anybody here, the world's largest DDoS attack? Because that's the way it was reported in the news. The world's largest DDoS attack. Over 300 gigabits was reported. The story is this. 2 commercial enterprises, one called Spam House that does spam management, and another one called Cyberbunker, which does hosted, co-located IT services and hosted IT services out of the Netherlands. Cyberbunker has a reputation of asking no questions, kind of like a Switzerland kind of business model. They don't care what you're doing with the disk and the throughputs. If you pay for it, you can do whatever you want. They're like the Star Wars bar, right? You know, that everybody goes to, and you can go find whatever you want right there. They purported to host and be spewing most of the world's bad stuff. Spam House finally got tired of them and blacklisted the entire environment. They got tired of being blacklisted from Spam House. So as soon as Spam House finally settled it and blacklisted in all of their environment, they lashed out with a massive attack. And it lasted, was it 5 days, 7 days? That took down Spam House. Along the way, they took down at least 4 of the world's biggest domain name registrars, 2 carriers, and a host of businesses, right? Because 2 private enterprises decided that they were going to take out their adjudication of ill will on the internet. That's what happened. It's like a schoolyard fight with nobody to go break it up. What's worse is they used, not a bot, they used an amplification attack. What's the difference? Anybody? Back in the back.
You just need to take something in that server and spoof some packets, throw it out, let somebody else's server do the work.
Yeah. You basically get other people to... the difference in an application attack and a bot is that there's a disparity sometimes between a request and a reply based upon the size. A small request and a large reply is always a rife environment for a DDoS attack. Anytime you get into a situation where you can put in a small request in terms of size, and you can have a large reply based upon the request that goes out, and then you can amplify that attack, you can get a DDoS attack. And if I can actually focus all the replies at a, this is like the classic Smurf attack, right? If I can focus all the replies on a single person, if you will, or domain name, I can take them off the internet. So they did this with open resolvers on DNS and amplification attack. There are 28 million open resolvers on the internet. There's almost 28 different million managed open resolvers. The reason I bring this up is that this wasn't a bot. This was a technique leveraging the internet against itself. And unless 28 million resolvers fix the problem, that weapon of mass destruction still exists out there today. You see what I'm saying? Yes, sir.
Assuming this is organized warfare, understand the concept. What's the military objective of the adversary? Because they can see so far that they cannot take control.
Right.
From the examples given.
Yeah.
And disrupt and increase our cost of business.
I think so.
But there is still don't understand the objective. If this is organized, if they are now in a battle arena,
Yeah.
softening up the target plus.
You know, yes, I think.
Organized crime then disguising or
And can organized crime be disguised as some, can people be disguising a hit based on like that it looks like it's organized crime, right? Or could there be a nation state that's, it's not like the CIA doesn't have front companies too, right? I don't want to get into a bunch of conspiracy. My point is to stretch your mind a little bit, and let's not just go with the superficial, right? That's all my point is on it. I think it's pretty fascinating that two companies can actually do so much harm to each other and have collateral damage in the middle of it, and many of us sit back and don't think that we will be a target. Yet we don't have to be a direct primary cited target in order to be hurt, especially in today's IT infrastructure, right? Like the previous speaker just said, there are very few companies that actually represent most of the traffic in the world, right? And if those companies are disrupted, we are all disrupted, right? It's as simple as that. Here's another fascinating story, New York Times. New York Times was recently taken down, right? Was New York Times data center attacked?
No.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? It's a fascinating story. So New York Times went offline, but their data center was never attacked. So how does that work? Well, if I'm pissed off at the New York Times and I can't get at their data center because they have maybe a really great security program, security people, or maybe I just don't even want to bother because it's easier to go after some of their tremendously valuable business associates that provide them services that are easier to attack. One of those easy ones to attack, which appeared to be very malicious and very easy, was this Melbourne IT, which is their domain name registration. If I can take out your domain name, I can take you off the internet, right? I don't care how much disk you're spinning. I don't care how much pipe you have. I don't care how many security programs you have in place. I don't care how your program is run. I know if nobody can resolve your name, you're down, right? Syrian Electronic Army had a spearfish attack during a handover of CEOs on the executive committee for the Melbourne IT. In that spearfish attack, they were targeting the New York Times. They uploaded a rootkit. They changed the domain name. They took New York Times offline. Right? How many of you guys are taking a look in terms of your availability to protect things like your critical cogs in the cloud infrastructures? As we migrate more and more to the cloud, are we just looking at data leakage compliance, or are we looking also at availability and integrity compliance, right? Is this our concern, or is it not our concern, right? Is the CISO at Netflix, who owns nothing, is availability of his systems still his concern? The CISO at Pinterest that owns nothing from an IT perspective, it's all out in the cloud. Uber, all out in the cloud. I mean, that's the future, right? But how do we get security done like that? Is it through SAS 70 reports? I don't think so, right? Not these kinds of attacks. All right, so Sun Tzu says that you will be attacked when you believe that when you essentially have hubris, when you think that you're most likely to be at your strongest point, and that's typically when you're at your weakest point. So, in the world of attacks out there, one of the things that Radware's been doing, we actually are announcing on the 27th of this month, we have an annual report, and our 2013 annual report is done. There's very similar results. There's some variances here, but look for it on the 27th. This is the origin of all attacks that were successful, the outage that the companies took, right? So the area, the device, the technology that failed. There's a belief that when you're under an attack that it's typically volume. This is the belief that we have. This is the urban myth that we propagate. It's absolutely countered by fact. But for whatever reason, and I go throughout the whole world, we believe the primary problem of DDoS attacks and cyber attacks is volume. And that volume is going to cause you a link failure. And once you solve this problem, you solve the problem. The reality is something different, right? But the illusion to us is we have an aspirin that we have to take that's link. We scrub it in the cloud, we scrub it at our carrier, we're settled. If it was that simple, you think we'd be talking about it? You know, would we be through this for 2 years now and going, you know, laboring through the problem, right? We have to wake up to the idea that this is far more complicated than that. There's volume attacks, there's non-volume attacks, there's intra-volume attacks within your environments. You know what? Some of these attacks are between tenants within clouded environments. What does that have to do with link size, right? It's far more complicated. And we do ourselves a disservice by simplifying the problem. We're not the only ones that are saying that the illusion is out there. Gartner suggests that there are 4 origins of outages. Gartner also suggests that these are the things that we're doing en masse to be able to protect ourselves. And when you span it over the rubric, you find that there's no single bullet. There's no silver bullet. You know, go figure, right? In security, when was the last time you heard that there was one single thing that you can do that would solve the problem, right? It's a defense in depth strategy in availability security, like it is in data leakage, like it is in integrity-based security. In addition, the future. If you're not a black hat fan, you know, I'd suggest just checking out every year exactly what the talks are. I think the talks are harbinger of exactly where things are going. In 2013, there was 2 major talks on DDoS. One of the talks was this universal DDoS mitigation bypass. This is why I can say safely that the future is bots, and the future is bots that you won't be able to distinguish from legitimate traffic, right? Their postulation in this talk and this paper, which is available out there, was that they could bypass all of the world's security technology that distinguishes illegitimate traffic from legitimate traffic. In other words, what is called anti-automation technology. The technologies that are trying to establish that you're human behind the connection. Things like CAPTCHA, right? Things like JavaScript challenges, things like redirects. In that talk, they showed a tool called Kill 'Em All 1.0, where they had in this tool fit the ability to actually mimic a website's legitimate traffic and overcome all of the anti-automation technology. And they tested it in the demo, and you can see this online yourself, against major vendors. I will just caveat, Radware was not on there. And they bypassed all technologies, all CAPTCHA technologies, all challenge technologies, right? So you ask yourself exactly what would you do in the situation that somebody was using this tool in order to combat you, right? What would you do? It's a very difficult question. I tell you, this is the kind of thing that chills you, right? This is the future, is for them to actually attack so that your attack will not become obvious to you until what you believe is legitimate traffic or users all of a sudden become illegitimate, and it'll be at the worst time for you, right? So it's a cat and mouse game, and the cat's kind of scary, right? My daughter always looks at this, and she seems to think that's pretty, and my dog, who likes to watch TV, always barks at it. All right, so what do you got to do? So that's the way I see the problem. That's the way we see the problems. Let me tell you what the answer is. It's a complicated problem. Unfortunately, the answer is somewhat complicated. The world of bots that are attacking you, whether they be with people behind you with them or tools behind them, is requiring more and more automation in our response. We cannot put as much time into our response because their response on their attack is fast. And we need our tools to actually match their tools. Of course, there needs to be humans in the loop, but not the kind of the human interaction that we're used to from the past. In addition, security professionals have taken on a new role. We're traditionally used to taking a role of vulnerability managers and risk managers. The role that we're not used to is protecting the engineering assumptions that goes into IT service delivery, right? When was the last time that you even asked a question, no less thought about the fact that your role is to protect things like this server's total connections per second, or this pipe's packets per second capability, or how many concurrent connections this firewall can handle, or how many simultaneous regex fires that IPS can deal with, right? These are engineering assumptions. These aren't necessarily vulnerabilities. However, exploited, they will overload all of those engineering devices and make that whole system inoperable to you. Every single device, including devices that we make, has an overload situation. They all have recipes. Let me give you an example. Anybody administer a firewall in here? Anybody? Yep. Well, yeah, so what's a typical session, the amount of sessions that a firewall can handle?
A big one, maybe 10,000.
10,000. How fast do you think you can get to 10,000 sessions on a firewall? You know, in a malicious attack.
Oh, a couple minutes.
Yeah, right? You think it's pretty well known how many sessions each firewall can match, and when people are actually hitting you, they're actually testing these?
Yeah, absolutely.
How about regex? How many people know what is a typical commercial grade IPS? How many simultaneous regex fires can a commercial grade IPS normally handle before it overloads? Anybody know the answer to that? It's a well-kept secret in the industry, I can tell you that. There are people who know the answer to this. Take a guess. Can it be, is it 2 intrusion events? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 200?
I'm going to guess 10, multi-threaded systems. They probably have 10 threads.
8's average, 20 is great. Over 20 is like almost unheard of, right? You think it's hard to throw 20, sweet signatures that regexes can find and go and fire to overload them? It's not hard at all, right? All right. So the reason I bring up that is that there's something called envelope attacks. These are the attacks that all they're seeking is to overload your stack, overload your sessions, overload your concurrent connections, overload your requests, overload your replies, right? When you scan your environment, you're not going to find vulnerabilities for these things. They're not vulnerabilities. It's like a wing on a plane. They're designed to do something. You can put them in a position that can become a vulnerability, but inherently they're not vulnerabilities.
Well, I laugh because, when we're a security firm, and sometimes we haven't done this, but you hear complaints from customers that their pen test overloaded and crashed their system.
Right. Yeah, and they're complaining about it.
What pen tester is going to bring it
Yeah, and you should argue, well, maybe your systems are. Listen, we had an attack. We had a customer the other day, very big managed service environment, call us up and say their customer was down, they're under attack, and our tools didn't identify it. And listen, you're always open to it. That could happen. There's no doubt about it. It's a chess game. So we instantly got our emergency response team involved. We looked at the attack. We were looking through the packets. So these are legitimate requests. In fact, it was a battery company. We said, in fact, I can hook this back to an ad that you had posted out on the internet. These are requests from links from ads. This wasn't an attack. This was an enormous response to a marketing campaign, right? It was all legitimate. And that's why the tool didn't actually see any difference. Just the infrastructure was not able to handle the legitimate requests that were coming through, right?
This attack, the universal DDoS multi-directional bypass, was used last year with AppNexus, the app exchange. So they do they price ads.
Right. You saw it used out in the wild?
Yeah, in the wild.
Yeah. He saw the universal bypass tool used in the wild. That's what he was saying. So there's 6 things you got to do at your perimeter. Understanding that your perimeter is no longer so obvious, right? It's porous. And you need to look, some of these things we're used to, directed attacks and intrusions. Localized volume. What is a localized volume attack? Today they have attacks. They're not even worried about your carrier bringing you the volume. They can actually generate the attacks in your own environment, right? I can generate requests from your DNS servers to other localized servers. I can request ICAP files, and so forth, request scans. How many scans do you do in your environment? Yes, sir.
Just curious, it seems like a lot of the things you're concentrating on are attacks against availability? Are there a lot of attacks against integrity and confidentiality?
Yeah, there are, but you're right, I'm not focused on it at the moment. I mean, I think, the whole SSL infrastructure, if you've been following it, I think has a lot of debate whether or not it's trustworthy, right? I mean, almost every single certificate management company has been confiscated or has been violated in the last 2 years, right? I mean, hopefully I'm not saying anything you don't already know, right? But there's been massive attacks, specifically in Europe, and there's been strong philosophical struggles on whether or not, and probably the fellow from the previous speaker, we could probably talk about how some of these certificate management companies are not, some of these models are old, let's face it, right? They're not really keeping up with what we're doing today. SSL has been around for 15 years. This is before smartphones, this is before AJAX, this is before the idea of social media, right? This is before the idea of a constantly interconnected economy. If you remember September 11th, right, the way we communicated was text. There was no social media. This wasn't that long ago, right? There's no smartphones. That wasn't that long ago, right? So the world's changed, and we're still using a lot of the techniques and tools. What I always tell people is that, and listen, I built some pretty big infrastructures. The infrastructures that I put in place I was also at Barclaycard US, that the infrastructure I put at Barclaycard and at Campbell Soup Company would not protect against this. But these weren't the attack profiles that I was looking at back then. So if I still had that same infrastructure today, the same detection, the same mitigation, I'm clearly missing something. Why do you think 20 of the country's biggest banks were attacked, and 18 of them, with all their money and all their people and all their risk management processes and everything, go down, right? Because the threat landscape instantly changed, and now they're attacking things that we're not looking at. Yet we're still looking at the problem the way we had done historically on the historical data points, with you trying to get something out of our old tools and hoping that's going to cover a new threat profile, right? And this is, the cat and game. It is the world of security that we live in, but that's what's going on here. This is new to us. I think many of us are still resisting the idea that this is even our responsibility, right? I suggest it is. It's somebody's. Nobody else is taking care of it. Encrypted attacks. The other thing that really killed the banks was the encrypted flags. I won't even talk about loan slow. You can't fight what you can't detect. You need to detect. You need to detect these here. Why? Because you can't detect them here and you can't detect them here. This is the cloud. You can't detect them in the cloud. You have to detect them at your perimeter. I understand your perimeter is a different notion today. The things that you can't detect at the perimeter, that you can't detect in the cloud, are these things. The WAF used to be a PCI tool. The WAF today is the biggest tool that you can use to protect the availability of your systems. So if you don't even have a PCI use case for a WAF, today it's one of the biggest anti-DDoS tools that's out there for application level attacks, not for network level attacks, right? But these are very deadly attacks that will pierce. Absolutely will pierce. Why? Because you don't even know the attack is going on until after the transaction has begun. It's a legitimate user that's connected, that looks legitimate, until actually in the middle of the connection they begin misuse. And then the third piece is you need to actually get as much forewarning and scrubbing of volume-based attacks in the cloud. No doubt about it. You cannot wait for that tidal wave to hit you. So this needs to be done in the cloud. This is what we typically think of, but there are other areas. Anybody speak Chinese? I've always been wondering if my Chinese is right on this. So my quick, I'll go through quick final conclusions, right? I don't think you can assume that you're not a target. I think we're in security. Most of us hopefully have this philosophy today. I hear this a lot from security professionals, and it's frustrating to me, right? And I think it's because many of us have grown up in the world of legislation, regulation, as it relates to data leakage. I don't mean to minimize it. It's a very important part to security. It's one of our major pieces to who we are. But protecting your data from loss is not everything. If you can't access your data, what do you have? If your data is junk, what do you have? Protecting your data is not everything, and I hear this a lot. Just protect your data and then you don't have to worry about anything else. You have to protect access to your data, you have to protect the fidelity of the data, and you have to protect the data. Right? That's our job. Don't control all of your business critical systems. This is a major assumption that we believe. Continually landscape your environment to what has been outsourced and what can actually, if they put a cross over that cog in your business in the cloud, if that went away and then you go down, what role do you have in protecting that cog? This one's pretty obvious. This is what I think if I was in your role today in an enterprise, I'd be spending most of my time worrying me. It's not the stuff that I can see, it's the stuff that I can't see. The way that you know you're not seeing something is when there's some problems going on and you can't figure out what they are, right? That's a classic indication that you can't see something, right? The server keeps on going down and you think it's acting funny, right? You have still problems in your environment of sluggishness, lethargy, outages, and you don't know why. It's probably a good indication that you can't see something. And there's a lot of propaganda out there. I think actually one of the biggest problems we have in DDoS in particular, and I know I'm focusing a lot on DDoS, is us. And what I mean by that is us, is that we don't have a very strong knowledge base in security on the origins, the technical origins of the security availability problem. I teach CISM and CISSP students. I've gone through all of the academic teachings on this, and I can tell you we always use the same stupid example from 1996 and the Smurf attack or something like that, you know, which isn't really relevant today. And we don't really understand, like for example, if I said a push synact flood, what is that? What does that affect? What devices generate that? How do you protect against it? Where are your weak spots? The definitions, technically, of what this stuff is something I think we can all benefit from. And that's how we can get through a lot of the vendor propaganda. They know your limitations in your environment. I always say one of the quickest ways you can tell people that really understand the availability problem is you ask them things like, how many PPS can you handle in your environment? What's the first device that's going to fail in your environment? How many CPS can you handle? How many concurrent connections can you handle? If you know, in terms of resiliency, what is the millisecond resiliency in your environment? How much tolerance do you have to latency? And if you have quick answers to that in your security department, then you know you have a strong availability-based security team that's looking at not just availability, probably other things too, right? All right. I told you I wouldn't talk products. Hopefully I was good. You're better than my dog. How's that? Any questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions? Nobody? Yes, sir.
I kind of feel like a lot of the problems that you see here are probably based on the attitude that a lot of people just outsource their security for its availability. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. You know, this reminds me of, like, you know, when you have a VoIP system problem and then you're trying to figure out where the VoIP system problem is, and you have your carrier complaining that it's your vendor solution, you have your vendor solution complaining that your hardware that you're using, your hardware, and nobody seems to really be telling you what the truth is, and you don't really maybe understand the problem technically enough to know, you know. What I see a lot out there, I see this a lot, is that we have a customer right now that came to us Friday, so today is Thursday, almost a week ago. Big company. This is an ATM company. And they had been up and down, up and down, up and down all week. And I mean down for long periods of time. Now you guys don't necessarily see it all the time because you'll go to an ATM machine and it may work, it may not, you may think it's out of cash, what have you, right? But they were down for hours in a day, right? And so they had certain vendors, and they were outsourced. They go to install tools, and you know, their processes are such that they can't do anything quickly, even internally, right? So they're down. Then they got to go through change management, and then they got to go through the vendor. You know, the outsourced vendor has to put it in a test mode in a QA, and then they have to bring it in, put it in. Even during crisis, right, like this, when the banks were being attacked, I can tell you they had. I won't forget this either. A major top 10 bank, commercial bank, they were installing our system. It was around December 18th. I know it's because my birthday. And they had just completed doing all the testing, and we said, okay, great, let's go in line, let's start fighting the attack. They were down that day. That day they were completely down. It was a major bank. He said, well, we're going into the end of year freeze window, so we're not allowed to make any changes. I said, but you're down. You know, the whole system is down. I mean, the whole business is down. No, I know we're down, but we're not really, this is a very big process in the bank, and we can't really overcome the process. So I don't know what I'm really saying other than, like, you know, there's like this, you just feel like people don't,
You find yourself.
they're not connecting the dots, yeah, you know? And so the business is asking them to get things done. You can clearly see that. And you can see that they're trying to toe the line. They're trying to do the right thing. And then there are these processes in between, and it just seems like it's like a comedy routine. I mean, you really could write a Dilbert on the whole thing, you know?